I'm Kathy Lacey, a very big fan of Dr. Lieberman's, and I appreciate all the work that he has done in this big field of mental illness. Mental illness is something that touches almost everyone, whether it is themselves or a family member or a friend or a colleague at work. This is a critical time for us to be examining mental illness. His book also focuses on an area that is of growing concern, and that is schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is by far one of the most dangerous aspects of mental illness. Dr. Lieberman knows how to deal with these people, addresses these issues, and is really someone that the communities, all communities, should pay attention to.
The Malady of the Mind is the book that you have to read if you have anyone in your life who suffers from this dread disease of schizophrenia, because it offers understanding, it offers real insight into the why of it, the how of it, and how to cope with it. It's the book that you would absolutely give to somebody who had any kind of mental health issue that you suspected was linked to this dread malady of the mind. It's an important book. It's going to have a long life, I think, in the libraries of anyone who cares about mental health.
I'm going to embarrass you.
Okay.
Okay. Here we go.
I'm in charge.
We're bringing out the sound effects.
Thank you.
Welcome
Sylvia.
everybody. Come on in, if those of you can fit in.
Sylvia.
And my name is Patrick Kennedy. I'm a friend of Jeff Lieberman. I'd like to just first go through some housekeeping items. As you can see from the walls and from walking around here, this is a pretty extraordinary gallery, so they want to make sure I tell them not to spill your wine on the floor, on the chairs, or put handprints on any of the delicate art around here. Apparently there's $1 billion worth of art in this house, and we want to really begin by thanking some of the folks. Graham Arter, the proprietor here, who has been good enough to welcome us and allow us to use this venue. Glen, come on up. And there's Glen Close, everybody, our good friend. And I also want to thank his niece, Alexandra, for helping us get situated here. Also, please turn off all your cell phones. As you can see, there's a boom mic here, and I'm being recorded, so hopefully I perform well for Jeff. But please know that you might get caught up in this. If you have a problem with that, too bad. You're here. You said yes to coming, and so you're going to be part of this. I'd like to first just ask our special guests to say a few words about Jeff and the book before I get a chance to introduce him. And I'll start immediately to my right. Glen, as you all know, has lived experience, as I'm sure 90% of the people in this room do, which is why everyone appreciates what a titan Jeff Lieberman has been in the field of psychiatry, and particularly research into schizophrenia. And besides just being a family member, we know her as a great actress and stage presence. And even more importantly to all of us, she has been out there consistently fighting on behalf of all of us in the mental health world, and started Bring Change to Mind, which is just rolling, Glen. I mean, it's just rolling. It's really bringing to all these college campuses a lot of knowledge and awareness around mental illness. It's drawing people in to be able to talk about it. It takes on stigma, and it's making a big difference. So with that, I give you Glen Close.
Well, Bring Change to Mind actually is high schools.
High school.
High schools.
Yeah.
And as of this fall, we'll have 550 high school clubs across the country. where they establish peer-to-peer rooms without stigma, where kids learn about mental health, they take care of each other, they're vigilant for each other, and they reach out into their schools. And it really is a remarkable movement among the high school kids. We do have also initiatives growing in colleges, but mainly so far it's really taken off in high schools. My nephew, Kalen Pick, was diagnosed at McLean Hospital with schizoaffective disorder. He came home after 2 years, and none of his friends came back. And he's a beautiful human being. He was the leader of the gang, and it was because of stigma. And my sister Jessie was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder, with psychotic tendencies. I was just talking to her on the phone last night. She's having a bit of a rough time, but you know, it's always with the meds. And everyone here knows how far we still have to go with the meds to make them more efficient, more, and it's just, you have this that's a plus, and then you have this as a minus. And someday, I think we'll get to the point where meds will all be a plus. But I'm sure you all here because you know that. I am here because I am personally incredibly grateful to Jeff for the way he has always been there for me and for my friends. And I think, you know, you think somebody who was in the position that he was in and as distinguished as he is through many years and the books that he's written, he has helped save lives of people very, very close to me, the relatives of people very close to me. I once, when I was doing Sunset Boulevard most recently, had a stalker who became a little worrisome. And instead of, we of course, you know, called in more security and everything. But then I thought, well, you know, what's going on with this woman? Why is she doing this? And called Jeff. And with his help, we got her to what is it called?
New York Presbyterian Hospital.
What?
New York Presbyterian Hospital.
Yeah.
The emergency.
Yeah. But she volunteered. That's what the word I'm trying to. She voluntarily went there, so it wasn't just a case of you know, pushing somebody away or making them you know, a criminal or bringing it, but to help them. And then we learned that she had lost her mother. I mean, it was, she had, of course, as everyone does, a very personal story. So when somebody is there for you consistently and then has this incredible well of knowledge and wisdom, he's somebody unusual and as Patrick said, he's a titan. So I'm here to honor you, to congratulate you for this book. I am reading it. I am absolutely mesmerized by it. I can't wait to. Jessie was relieving through it, and she would say, "Yeah, that's right.
Did you win that battle in Idaho with the mental health program?
What?
Remember the battle in Idaho? You were
In Montana?
Montana, I mean. Yeah.
Oh, I have things to report about that. So we had a community nonprofit hospital who the CEO refused to have any beds for anyone who was having a psychiatric ward. There was no psych ward in this hospital, and yet it was supposed to be a community hospital. And all of us in the community knew that mental health was one of the, I mean, if not the major thing now, as things are, in our community. So a bunch of us, led by these two Spitfire women who are nurses, one's a doctor, started to agitate. letters to the local newspaper. We, in the dead of winter, we protested outside the hospital with our signs that we had made, and we heard that all the doctors were told, they were told not to have anything to do with us, as if we would be. Finally, we got a meeting with the board and the CEO, who was not a good man, and basically they sloughed us off. But the head of the board resigned. The CEO got a 92% negative vote from both his doctors and his nurses. He's out. And we've had a second meeting with the interim woman who is also a practicing pediatrician, and they are going to start doing a 12-bed psych ward. So, and it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's all about, we kept saying it is not best practices to have people who are suffering from mental health issues, well, first of all, put in the back of a sheriff's car and driven 3 hours away to another hospital, or driven, what they were proposing, 3 miles away from the hospital without going through the emergency room. So now it's like a miracle. You think they've actually heard what we're saying.
But if you need a chief of the psychiatric unit, I'm available.
Wow, wouldn't we be so lucky? Anyway, dear friends, it's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure none of these decisions not to open mental health wings have nothing to do with the fact that the pay for and reimbursement by both the federal government and private insurance is a huge disparity, to say the least. We're seeing mental health workers paid, reimbursed at 70% of Medicaid, whereas for the rest of healthcare it's over 80% of Medicare. These are just standard metrics. And of course, because of that, people don't stay in the insured system, which is why it's so difficult for us to sustain a really big public health approach, because people have to go outside of insurance to make a living. So it's a big issue, and it's among many issues that we need to focus on. Thanks for raising its implications. Andrew Solomon, you'll know, another author that has been extraordinarily helpful in helping to demystify mental illness. You hopefully are familiar with his Noonday Demon, which received all sorts of awards and recognitions. And really, there isn't a lot of literature that is as substantive as he has put out there, where he mixes both his own personal story and the history of the movement, except maybe my book. But I would like to introduce Andrew. Everywhere there's big things going on around mental health, Andrew's always there leading the charge. Andrew.
Well, I wanted to say that it's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and it's wonderful to see so many of you gathered on this occasion in support of Jeff and of this book. I'm currently writing a book about youth suicide. I've been deeply enmeshed in various parts of psychiatric practice. I feel I wouldn't be able to do many of the investigations that I'm doing if I hadn't had the many advantages that Jeff conferred on me. But let me begin by echoing what Glen just said. Over the years, I've had to call Jeff over and over and over again, and I've said, I have a friend who's struggling, and can you recommend a therapist? Somebody I know just had a daughter diagnosed with schizophrenia. What do you think they should do? There's someone in Milwaukee who has no health insurance. What do you do if you're in Milwaukee with no health insurance and facing psychosis? And Jeff has unfailingly, time after time after time, called me back, usually within an hour, and said, I'm working on it, I'll have a name for you by tomorrow. And there's always been a name. And so he has saved the lives of many people. I know the lives, the stability, the experience of many people, and I feel so deeply indebted to him for that. He kindly gave me a professorship at Columbia that I've squeezed for everything it's worth, so I thank him for that as well. And when I was working on a book called Far from the Tree, I had decided to write a chapter that dealt with schizophrenia and with how families responded to having children who were newly diagnosed with schizophrenia. And I thought, well, I faced the issue of depression. I've even written a bit about bipolar disorder, but I was utterly intimidated by schizophrenia. And I thought, where should I begin? And I began by calling Jeff. And I said, I have been reading a lot, and I don't understand how it all fits together. And we went out for what turned out to be a very extended drink at the Carlisle just across the street. And we sat there and we talked. And he gave me not only an enormous amount of information, but also a long list both of people to talk to and of things to read. And it was really the beginning of my having any insight that I had into that condition. And I've had many letters from people since then thanking me for the information that I shared with them. And I have to thank Jeff for putting me on the path to that information that I could never otherwise have conveyed. I wanted to say also, putting whatever it is, as somebody at a wedding I recently was at said, it's a relief when you put the elephant in the room on the table. But I wanted to say that I think Jeff's remarkable work was overshadowed by some unfortunate episodes involving the press and elsewhere, and that they are blocking people from having access to this book. If someone I know had a child newly diagnosed, or even not so newly diagnosed, this is the book that I would give to that person. It's full of unbelievably clear, lucid information, beautifully organized, well put together, coherently presented, and it has a real role to play. And if the American people end up not having access or adequate access to the work that's in this book, that is a loss not only for all of us who love Jeff, and not only for Jeff himself, but also for the American people, among whom the rates of schizophrenia continue to be so extraordinarily high, much higher than most people want to acknowledge, admit, or represent. And so I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge, as Glenn and Patrick have alluded to, the fact that the mental health care system in the United States is terribly divided. People write to me and say, you suffered from such terrible depression and you got better. I'm not getting better. What did you do that I can't do? And partly it was responsive to medication, and partly I had people around me who were very loving and caretaking, and I was lucky in all of those regards. But I was also well insured and able to do some things that fell outside of insurance, and the mental health system that I would suspect everyone in this room occupies, there's almost no relationship at all to the mental health system that most Americans are obliged to occupy. And I would like to acknowledge that one of the many efforts that Jeff made when he was at Columbia was to find strategies to bring about some degree of equality or justice in a system that at the moment is punitive and cruel. It may be acceptable to say it is a luxury to be able to buy the beautiful maps that Graham has hanging around his gallery. There will never be a society in which everyone can do that. But mental health is not a luxury, and being able to have the best life that you can have in terms of your own ability to function is not a luxury. And Jeff's previous work, and indeed this book, which by its very accessibility becomes democratizing, serve to strengthen a country in which so many people are left to suffer in silence. So I have both personal, professional, and a sort of more universal line to thank Jeff for his remarkable work.
Andrew, you said it just the way I wrote it down for you. I'm so glad you captured just as my remarks. The only problem is I won't be able to give them later because you stole them from me. So your praise for Jeff's work was incredible, but I think Sylvia Nasar's takes the cake with her incredible statement that this is a must book, perhaps the most important book on the subject of schizophrenia, ever and is a must-read. So I'd like to invite Sylvia, who wrote A Beautiful Mind. So if there's ever a person who can bestow a special honor on Jeff through her remarks, it's certainly someone like Sylvia.
I'm so honored to be here. In 1949, when John Nash applied to Princeton, his undergraduate advisor sent the university the most concise letter of recommendation ever received there. This man is a genius, and brevity won the day. A few months later, John Nash was welcomed into the Olympus of mathematics, and very shortly thereafter, his fellow students were describing him as obnoxious, immature, a brat, but a brat with a clear, logical, beautiful mind. Since I'm maybe the last speaker, I think brevity might be welcome here too. And I just want to say that the genius of Jeff's book, in my mind, is its realism and its practicality. So much of what has been written about schizophrenia has been about the great medical breakthroughs, the great scientific breakthroughs that were going to change everything. But Jeff's book really focuses primarily on the here and now, the world we live in which early detection, early diagnosis, early and effective intervention, and sustained support, both medical and social, make all the difference. And as you probably know, most people don't have access to those things. And so the whole point of this book is, if we make better use of what of the knowledge that we have and the tools that we have, so that everybody can, all those 19 and 20-year-olds, everybody can have that access to a life. That is the message. And it's a message long overdue. Thank you.
So Andrew mentioned how Jeff gave him this great position at Columbia. But what you don't know is, after I left Congress, Jeff hired me when he was president of the American Psychiatric Association. That was my first job out of Congress. And I said, well, you should hire me after all those years of paying your kind of people, all these years. It's the least you could do, given the fact I've supported many psychiatrists for many years. So, but the thing that he wanted me to help him with is to how to take all this knowledge that Andrew and Sylvia have just talked about and translate it into public policy. And of course, that's what we've been trying to do for many years. Only recently have we had some much more progress, especially around the mental health parity law that is supposed to require that we treat illnesses of the brain no differently than we treat any other illnesses of the body. But Jeff has been out there and understood that he can't just be, quote, in the ivory tower, making enormous strides in biomedical research. We need to translate that, as Sylvia just said, through greater investments that the country makes in this space. So both in the basic sciences of neuroscience as well as in the application through healthcare that Sylvia just spoke about, and Glenn mentioned is still obstructed. So I just want to say that if you think about a medical civil rights movement, you can't think of a movement that's been more outside the main than treatment for people with mental illness. It is a separate, and as you've just heard, unequal system of care, never reimbursed the same way, never invested in terms of research the same way. At every level, there is no equality to how we treat cancer, AIDS, cardiovascular disease, you name it. And Jeff has understood that, and it's why I particularly admired him, is because he really was interested in public policy. So he helped us really kick off this important anniversary of President Kennedy's moonshot. We've since had President Biden steal it for cancer, but he came up to it, and it was really intended to be around neuroscience, because we invited all the NIH directors, and with Jeff's help, we brought them all together to honor this. And people would say, well, this is the race to space. And Jeff really understood that what we should talk about in terms of the new frontier is it should be a race to inner space. And that all of our neuroscientists should be the astronauts of our time, the heroes, the people who are making the inroads so people can get better therapy and treatment. So in that regard, I'll introduce the astronaut of all astronauts, the guy who has done more for this space in neuroscience and understanding this disease that not only affects the individual, but of course, as all of you know, so profoundly affects the whole family. And that's the kind of person who's made an enormous difference in his life. And we're proud of you, Jeff. We love you. And we're grateful for your contribution to the field.
That's a good line, inner space. You know, I wish I could say that I have the kind of reputation and accomplishment that allows me to run in the company of these celebrities, including Tina, who's taken a seat in the peanut gallery because she's shy and timid, and just got back from London and is terribly jet lagged. But I've come to know and become friends with them in the way that they described it. I mean, the connection is just that they've had lived experience with members of their family, and they've sought help. And unfortunately, in order to get good quality care, you may need to call the chair of the department of the leading department in the country. Like, if I want to get care for cardiovascular disease, I'll call Craig Smith back here. But actually, I can call any one of a number of people in his department who are good, but you know, nobody knows where to get care and good care. Also, I met Patrick, as he said, when I spent 30 years in the ivory tower doing laboratory research on neurobiology, psychopharmacology, and severe mental disorders. I came to Columbia, its largest department in the country, annual budget of $280 million, 400 faculty, 2,000 employees, and you deal with regulatory policies, insurance reimbursement, hospital administration, and wow, I didn't go to medical school for this. And I said, this sucks. The system was so dysfunctional. I said, we got to change it. So I thought, how do you change it? Well, you go to Washington, top down. So I ran for APA president. I was elected. I said, okay, Patrick is a free agent now. I'm going to get some bench help. And spent 2 years. The only thing I did there was help him with the Mental Health Parity Addiction Equity Act, which still hasn't been enforced adequately. But that was attacking the major issue of how can you get good care if you don't have reimbursement rates that are going to make it worth the while of providers to do, and hospital administrators are going to see that it isn't a negative on their balance sheet. All the people here I've connected with in one of a variety of different ways. Because of that, and because of the realization of the dysfunction of the system and than being sobered in my attempt at politics. I came back to New York, and I said, well, I'm going to change things through public opinion. You know, I'd written 800 scientific papers in my turgid prose that were in scientific journals, and 15 books on medicine and science and psychiatry, but I'd never written for the lay public. So I started trying to write some things like op-eds, and the book that got, or the piece that got the most hits and the most attention was a piece called "The Profession That Everybody Needs and Nobody Wants." And it basically was about psychiatry, meaning that who understands what psychiatry is? So I decided to write a book. I got an agent, proposal. The publisher was Little Brown, now it's Scribner's. Gave it a different title than I had, which was very poetic. I was saying like something about the mission to save the minds of humanity, and they called it, no, it's Shrinks, the Untold Story of Psychiatry. And I said, well, that's a little demeaning. You know, it's like pimple poppers for dermatologists or gas passers for anesthesia. And by the way, in no other country in the world, in no other language in the world, do they have an equivalent term that's used than Shrinks. So it's a little derogatory, but everybody knows it. So at any rate, that started it. And it was a sobering experience because it got great reviews. Pamela Paul is here. She was the book editor for the New York Times Sunday Book Review. And she's totally by the book, you know, hard as, you know, objective, but it got a great review, and she actually picked it for her podcast, weekly podcast. But it didn't make back its advance, and so no matter how good the reviews were, it wasn't going to, I wasn't going to get any interest from anybody else on a follow-up book. But my agent was able to persuade me to do another book, and so I said, okay, what do I do it on? She says, schizophrenia. I said, who is going to want to read a book about an illness that most people don't understand, think is something else like multiple personality, fear that it's uncurable and not even treatable, is stigmatized like AIDS and leprosy was, and are skeptical of the medical specialty, scientific bona fides. And she said, you'd be surprised. So I said, okay, I'll write a proposal. And in the meantime, Hidden Valley Road came out. And Hidden Valley Road is written by a journalist, Robert Kolker, about a family in Colorado, a military family in the Air Force, and they had 12 children, 6 of whom had schizophrenia. And the period was circa 1960s, 70s. It is like reading a horror story. Everything bad that you can imagine happened to them. And it was a primer in what not to do, what shouldn't happen to people in schizophrenia. So I like to think of Malady of the Mind, Schizophrenia and the Path to Prevention as the antithesis of it. It doesn't pull punches and shy away from the realities of the grim challenges people and their families face, but it describes, as Sylvia said, in a practical way, that psychiatry is like the Rodney Dangerfield of medicine. And one of the reasons, and one of the consequences of that is that it gets blamed for everything. You know, your treatments don't work. Well, we have a sibling, a brain science sibling. It's called neurology. So tell me, has anybody heard of any innovations for Parkinson's disease besides L-DOPA? Has anybody heard of any treatments that work for ALS? Has anybody heard of any treatments that are working for the neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's? Now, I'm not saying that neurology is asleep at the wheel. I'm just saying the brain's tough and research is tough. So the point is this, is that the stigma which is associated with mental illness is also borne by psychiatry. And the thing that my colleagues often have very much difficulty owning up to is that a lot of it is justified. I mean, prior to the 1950s, I mean, everything that went on in psychiatry prior to the 1950s was ineffective or harmful. And it's only since then that there's been any scientific traction which has enabled an understanding of the disease, the underlying basis of it, and development of treatments that can be effective in treating it. And some bad shit went on. I mean, when you think about it, apart from the lobotomies, the insulin coma, the snake pit asylums, the Freudian terminology of refrigerator mother, schizophrenogenic mother. Psychiatry had a lot to own up to, and it didn't try, or it didn't try well enough, and the residue of that continues to plague us. But that aside, what the book was trying to do, as Sylvia has pointed out, is really try and, in a very unvarnished way, talk about what our existing knowledge is. And by the way, the existing knowledge that we have is largely through serendipity, not through a priori scientific hypotheses that are studied and proven. But as my father said, sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. And the problem is we don't use these. But I just want to say, do one more thing, and then since this is a book party, I guess I'm supposed to read something. So I'm just going to do that, say a last word, and then stop. So the question that should have been asked when my agent said, write a book about schizophrenia is, and she said, and I said, why? And she said, because that's what you know. And she should have said, why did you study that? That's like, the graveyard of brain disorders. It's like you're signing up to do pediatric oncology. But the reality is I had an incident which really impacted me emotionally. And it was quoted in the book. I'm reading in the paper just because it's easier. Chapter 18. In 1981, I was starting my first job working at Mount Sinai Hospital. I arrived home one evening and crawled into bed, intending to read myself to sleep. I reached for the stack of New Yorker magazines in the nightstand and opened a copy to an article by Susan Sheehan called The Patient. It told the story of Sylvia Frumkin, a pseudonym for a 31-year-old woman with schizophrenia. I was hooked from the opening scene, which read like a tragic burlesque. Shortly after midnight, on Friday, June 16, 1970, this is quoting from the article, Sylvia Frumkin decided to take a bath. Ms. Frumkin, a heavily, ungainly young woman who lived in Queens, walked from her bedroom into the bathroom to take a bath. A few days earlier, she had had her hair cut, shaped in the style of a bowl, which she found especially becoming. She washed her brown hair with shampoo and red mouthwash. Some years earlier, she had tinted her hair red and had liked the way it looked. So she thought that by doing this, it would make her hair permanently red. So after a few minutes of frolicking in the water and putting the mouthwash in her hair, she stepped out of the bathtub and she slipped on the bathroom floor, cut the back of her head, and as she fell, she was bleeding. Sylvia poured some perfume on the cut because she thought there would be an antiseptic in there. She also now believed that she was Jesus Christ and that the bleeding on her head was the beginning of a crown of thorns. When the bleeding didn't stop, she contacted the supervisor of her building, who drove her to the emergency room at Long Island Jewish Hospital. Sylvia's behavior was bizarre enough there that a doctor stitching her head up called for a psych consult. And when he arrived, Sylvia was repeatedly taking off her clothes and alternating between accusing the super of kidnapping her and asking him and the security guard to have sex with her. By about 5 in the morning, Sylvia was admitted to Creedmoor Psychiatric Center, the huge mental hospital on the eastern edge of Queens. It was not her first admission there, nor would it be her last. Creedmoor, which Sheehan describes as smelling of coffee, stale cigarette smoke, and unwashed and incontinent patients, was a case study in how not to treat the psychiatric patient, though it was hardly unique in the annals of mental hospitals. Sylvia spent weeks in a straitjacket and was subjected to all manner of treatments, including insulin coma. After I finished that first installment, I dug out the other 3 installments in Sheehan's series from the subsequent magazines and devoured them. The third part was called, Is There No Place on Earth for Me?, which would become the title of the Pulitzer Prize-winning book Sheehan published about Sylvia based on the New Yorker series. The question was one Sylvia asked her mother repeatedly. The first time when she was 16 years old and being transferred from a private psychiatric facility to a state mental hospital. Sheehan's 4 articles did everything a piece of journalism mental illness should do. First, it allowed us to see Sylvia not only during her most psychotic periods, in which she thought Mick Jagger wanted to marry her, she was pregnant with the Son of God, she wore a bandana on her head with a spoon lodged in it, and painted her whole face with bright red lipstick. But also when she was lucid and could remember the person she dreamed of being, I once thought, when I was about to finish medical secretarial school before I had a breakdown on the last day of school, that I'd graduate and get a job. I was looking forward to earning my own money, to having a credit card, to being a grown woman in my own right. Sylvia understood at that moment how far she was from those dreams. When you know all those things exist for other people, she said, but not for you, sometimes it's very hard to endure the not having. The second thing Sheehan accomplished was a detailed, behind-the-scenes view of life in a mental hospital. Remarkably, the director had welcomed her and encouraged her to spend 24 hours a day there, to talk to everyone and attend their meetings, and to let the public know how bad things were there. And maybe that would help to make them a little better. So Sheehan weaved together the pieces from the perspectives of Sylvia, her family, and the hospital. The portrait that emerged was heartbreaking. I finished the series 3 hours later at 5 in the morning, feeling electrified and saddened and angry, and thought, surely we can do better than this. So, if you have an incurable illness, whether it's ALS, whether it's pancreatic cancer, whether it's a neurodegenerative dementia, only a scientific breakthrough is going to change the possibility of your survival and quality of life. But when you have treatments that are effective but are not being used, what is that? I mean, is it an unmet clinical need? Is it a healthcare disparity, like women not getting the same level of attention and research as males? Or pediatrics, children? No, I think it's a civil rights issue. There's a large segment of the population which is suffering because treatment's not available, either because it's not present in health systems, it's not affordable, the quality of care is not good enough, or they don't know where or how to go. This is being purposely withheld. And nobody is telling this story. And nobody is, well, there are people, but it's not being heard and resonating. The person that I have to call out as being really the hero in this regard is E. Fuller Torrey, who has been the champion of this and advocating for it. But it's a civil rights problem. It is a civil rights problem. There are 60,000 psychiatrists in the United States. There's 15,000 neurologists. Why? The epidemiology of neurological disease equates to a population frequency which is so much less than mental illness that there requires more and more psychiatrists. So the constituency to which this medical specialty is supposed to minister is not able to do it. And that is a failure of political and social will. And everyone who has family members who have suffered and unable to find treatment that is truly effective are bearing the brunt of it. Now, we don't have, as Glenn said, treatments that are perfect, but they damn well work. If you talk about Parkinson's disease, L-DOPA is the mainstay. L-DOPA only works for a period of time, and then it begins to wear off, and you have to take more doses more frequently. And if you see people who have advanced Parkinson's, you'll sit down with them for dinner and they look fine. By the end of dinner, they can't get up. Treatment works. You have to start early, when the progressive nature of the illness has already inflicted damage that causes irreversible impairment. Then it's another story. It requires wraparound support services, rehabilitation, case management, residential facilities, and they just don't exist. So the book was really to try and call attention to this. As Andrew said, this is a book about hope. I consider it to be the antithesis or the perfect complement to Hidden Valley Road. I just wish it would sell like Hidden Valley Road. But I want to thank Nan Graham is here, the publisher, Sally Howe, the editor, my wife, who is the reason for everything that I've done, and all of you for taking time to come here on the eve of a holiday weekend. I hope it was worth your while.